This is the Dallas Morning News.
We are just days away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training in beautiful Surprise, Arizona, as we welcome you to this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John C. Blake, as you can see the C on the screen there.
What does the C stand for? Champ?
It stands for Chauncey.
Chauncey. John Chauncey Blake.
It's a family name, as Chris can also attest to.
Well, in case you didn't know, I'm Evan Grant, and I'm the only one of us who will be leaving for Surprise come Monday.
Almost immediately after we recorded our last episode, the Rangers made probably their most big move of the offseason by acquiring left-hander Mackenzie Gore from the Nationals for 5 prospects. And we'll see how that obviously impacts the rotation and roles and the staff going into spring training.
Yeah, and we'll also talk with Rangers general manager Ross Fenstermaker, who's entering his second season in that role, about a lot of that stuff. And Ross has a lot of background with the prospect capital that the Rangers gave up, and as well can speak to the Rangers' approach to this past offseason, because I've had a lot of questions from fans.
And on this week's Archives in Arlington, we're going to look back at Rangers winter caravan stories. The way the caravans have worked now has changed a lot over the years. But what in particular is about the year we had an exploding Winnebago?
Well, this year, it imploded due to the oncoming snowstorm.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So, John, I mentioned only one of us is going to Arizona. What do you do when you don't go to spring training?
Well, I have more to do, probably this year. I've got a lot of things I've got going on. I may work the World Baseball Classic, which I've worked, this would be 5 times, I believe, over the years in Miami. And just getting ready for the season. I'll be honest with you, I went to spring training for about 46 years in a row. Last year being the first year I did not go. I had some little surgery, which we don't need to talk about here today. But frankly, I didn't miss it all that much. The pandemic really changed a lot, Evan, as you know. We were kind of nailed down there for basically 2 springs. I mean, 21 especially. And, of course, 20 ended early. But I have a lot of memories of spring training, and that may be another Archives in Arlington at some point. But it's just changed so much. And as you know now, I mean, the Rangers will have 65 players plus in camp, plus the JICs, the just-in-case guys that come over from the minor league camp. And there's so much coming and going. I think the fascinating thing this year for me, and it's always been the case, is when a new manager comes in and how he does things a little differently in spring training than his predecessor. And that's all. I've always enjoyed that. And obviously I've been there for a lot of new managers. But we'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Skip Schumacher runs his camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think my first, and we can talk a little more about this, but I think my first project for spring training, and every year kind of before spring training, I mention 5 storylines or 5 projects that the Rangers have to work on, and it's evolved over the years because it's not so much find a 5th starter, and it's not so much about who's going to pitch the 7th inning. It's more about concepts, because I think by and large teams, with the exception of maybe the 24th, 25th guys on the roster, 26th guy, they go to camp with an idea what their roster is probably going to look like barring injury. But I think that messaging is going to be a huge element of camp this year. And, like you said, with a new manager, that's very significant. I've talked with Skip a little bit about delivering that message the first day of camp already. And it is going to be it sets a tone for the season. And I think that the the Rangers management is well aware of that. I think Skip Schumacher is well aware of that. And I hope the players are in the position to hear that, because it is going to be a different message, and it is going to be probably a little bit harder hitting on things that this club needs to tighten up in terms of focus or complacency or whatever you want to call it. But I think those are going to be big things for this team.
And there are a lot of stories here at spring training. Yes, you have a lot of the same personnel coming back, but you've got to figure out your outfield alignment. You've got to see if Josh Smith is the guy at second base, and if not, the little rascals or whatever, the Cody Freemans, the Hellmans, the guys that came up, in September and brought energy to this club, where do they fit in? You've got to figure out your catching rotation, right? You didn't bring Jonah Heim back, who was pretty much the last 4 or 5 years was the Iron Man for the most part behind the plate. You've got to figure out how Kyle Higashioka and Danny Jansen, and then what's behind them in terms of depth. Not to mention the bullpen, which, as you've talked about how that's going to, so it's more, to me, it's more kind of what you say. It's kind of those overall concepts, and then how all these new players kind of fit in, and, the new coaches coming in and getting to know the guys and everything. So I think it's going to be a pretty significant spring.
I think where the outfield alignment is concerned, the Rangers will probably go to camp with a plan. And if things go according to plan, that's how it'll hold up. And I think that plan ultimately will call for Wyatt Langford in center field and Evan Carter starting out in left. Because I think Carter is going to platoon, and that means he's not going to be out there every day. It certainly means he could play 120 games if he sits against every lefty. But when he doesn't, then you're forced to either ask Wyatt to move from a corner to center field, or you're asking a backup to step in and play center field. So I think for the overall continuity, it just works better if you're just plugging and playing a left fielder as opposed to moving multiple pieces. So that's why I think that is not going to be that difficult for them to sort out. On second base, listen, I hold to the idea that Josh Smith has been an everyday player for the last 2 years, and so I think he goes into the season as the regular second baseman. Now, will he get everyday playing time against righties and lefties? Not sure. I think that there's an opportunity for Ezekiel Duran, who had a really good winter league, to make an impression in spring, to get more playing time and get some starts in the regular season against left-handers. I think that the biggest on-field thing for me, or the biggest single player that I'm looking at, is how the Rangers ultimately deploy Jacob Latz, because he could either be the number 5 starter, or I think Jacob could be a really valuable piece as a multi-inning guy in the back of the bullpen, pitching, early on with Nathan Eovaldi likely to be kind of monitored closely. And if Kumar Rocker is the 5th starter, I think Kumar will be, kind of a 5-inning starter. And so you could use Jacob Latz twice during every turn of the rotation, as opposed to once. And if you move him into the rotation, ultimately, when it's all said and done, he may have the ability to be the guy that you go to at the end of the game. He may be the guy that you could end up turning into your closer. So I think that's going to be the really key thing that we see play out. And some of that's not going to be determined by Jacob. Some of it's going to be determined by how Kumar Rocker pitches in spring training. I think that's somebody the Rangers are going to watch closely. I think on the position player side, I think the guy who may get watched closest is Josh Young. I think it's a big year for Josh Young, and I think he needs to come to spring training with the attitude, especially with the attitude of, I'm hungry, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to hold this job, and I'm going to be an everyday player. Listen, what Cody Freeman did last year with his energy and everything in September, I think that left an impression on the Rangers. I don't know if he can unseat somebody as an everyday player, but I think Cody's going to get an opportunity, particularly at third base, to try and make a little of a dent there.
So talking a little bit about the clubhouse, and clubhouses in spring training are tough. There's 65, 70 guys in a locker room. But from a veteran leadership situation, this is going to change. Marcus Semien is gone. Things are going to change in that clubhouse a little bit. And, you've got some great leadership from the pitchers and guys like DeGrom, especially Nathan Eovaldi. Are you going to be kind of looking at that in spring a little bit? I mean, and I know it's hard because you got so many guys, but you got some new veterans that are coming in and everything, and I think it certainly is a storyline going forward.
Well, I think Nimmo, mostly outwardly, you saw Marcus thrust into the spokesperson role with the media, and I think Brandon Nimmo will take that over on the position player side very easily. Where I do think there is an opportunity for some leadership to emerge, though, organically, is I think this could be Wyatt Langford's team for a long, long time. And going into his third year, if Wyatt is comfortable enough to make his feelings known, and particularly if he's in center field, if he's at the spine of the defense and hitting in the number 2 or 3 spot in the lineup, I think there's an opportunity for Wyatt to really take a step in terms of leadership or having a voice in the clubhouse. So that is something I'll be looking for. As you will know, John, when the media is in the clubhouse, very little actually takes place of significance. So what we read into leadership a lot of times isn't. And I don't know how much of a leader. This is not to besmirch Marcus in any way, and it's not to besmirch Corey Seager in any way. I don't know how much of a leader either one of those guys were. I know that Marcus was the guy who was thrust into the public spokesperson role a lot, but I don't see what goes on behind the scenes. And so I think that only over time does that start to emerge. Does a picture of that start to emerge, and probably not really until the regular season starts.
It'll be a long spring, Evan. I know you'll get a break in the middle. One last thing before we move on to our special guest today. 2 guys that are obviously in the lineup trying to rebound from 2025, Jake Berger and Jock Peterson. What do they have to do in spring to show that they can take that step back to what they've done in the past?
Yeah, I think that the way Jake finished the season was very encouraging to the Rangers. He was healthy pretty much from the middle part of August on. I think he finished with a .640 slugging percentage or a .630 slugging percentage, particularly against fastballs, which he was brought in to crush in the latter part of August and September. So I think that, yeah, he needs to rebound from last year's performance, but I think the Rangers feel like he's in a good place to do that. The big question is going to be on Jock. I do think that Jock you don't get to be a 10-year big league player with the reputation that Jock Peterson had without having drive. And I think Jock is motivated and driven to prove that 2025 was not the start of the downfall for him, that it was the aberration and not the new norm. So I think he was disciplined at the plate. He just didn't make enough contact, and he didn't do enough damage. And so I'll be interested to see what kind of shape he comes into camp, because I think there were a couple guys who thought, he was a little bit pudgy last year. He's never had the greatest physique on the planet, but I think it'll be interesting to see how he comes in. And yeah, I think he's got to have a more effective spring training. He didn't have a great spring training last year. And you wrote that off to new club, new guy, figuring everything out in the clubhouse. But I think this year the Rangers need to see a little bit more from him, because otherwise, they are going to have questions. I don't think there's a situation where he doesn't make the team to start the season, but certainly, if Jock Peterson goes into 2026 and really struggles at the plate, he's in the last year of his deal. I don't know that the Rangers are going to hold on to that all year.
Well, we'll see what happens, and we're going to be coming to you regularly during spring training. Evan from Arizona and me from places known and unknown, I guess. So we'll be talking about these issues and spring training again. It's highs and lows, and a lot of it is based on health. And there've been Rangers have had some catastrophic injuries in spring training over the years that have changed the entire direction of a season and a roster. And again, hopefully that will not happen here in 2026. So
right, and just to that point, John. Right, last year, I will say this: the Rangers have really have really reacted well in the past few years to spring training injuries and spring training lack of depth. Last year, John Gray and Cody Bradford went out, in the middle of spring training. The Rangers reacted by bringing Patrick Corbin in. All he did was pitch 150 innings. I don't think this team is done as we're going to ask Ross Fenstermaker a little bit about that, but I don't think this team is done. There will be some minor league deals or maybe even a low major league deal that's signed, and I think the Rangers could look for yet another left-handed reliever. I think they could look for a right-handed bat that would be kind of a utility, versatility type guy. I think there was some interest in Austin Hayes, but he signed with the Chicago White Sox. Maybe that puts Miguel Andujar in the mix. And I think, we haven't talked about what you brought up was Higashioka and Danny Jansen. And I think in a best case scenario, you're asking those guys to probably start about 70 games apiece behind the plate, maybe even a little less. And so there is going to be a need for a third catcher. Willie McIver is that guy right now, and he's optionable. So you've got that. But I think you need to sign another veteran here before camp starts to have as an insurance policy in case you lose one of those veterans to an injury sometime in spring training. And there's an assortment of guys out there still that will be available, including Jonah Heim, who, remarkably at the age of 30 is still out there on the free agent market, having been an all-star 3 years ago.
So we'll see how it plays out. And as Evan mentioned, Ross Fenstermaker, the Rangers general manager, is our guest. And Ross comes at it from a lot of experience in pro scouting, international scouting, oversaw the player development department, now is in his second year as general manager. And we'll talk to Ross coming up next. Our guest today on second episode of 2026 on SportsDay Rangers is Ross Fenstermaker, now in his second year as Rangers general manager, his 17th year, and I think now with the club since he started as an intern in 2010. Ross, thanks for joining us today. And I'm just going to start with an overview question for you guys. A lot of changes, obviously, in the offseason, starting with a manager, a lot of changes on the coaching staff, and then a lot of personnel moves here. The most recent major move coming with the Mackenzie Gore acquisition about 2 weeks ago. Here we are going in about 4 or 5 days away from spring training. How do you guys look at it and where you are at this point?
Yeah, John, first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Excited to be here. I think when we look at it, we feel pretty good about the spot that we're in right now, heading out to Arizona here in about a week. Like you mentioned, we've had a busy offseason. We've had a lot of moves to make. We had double-digit free agents departing and had to backfill a lot of positions. We've made 2 very large trades, probably one of the largest trades I've been a part of in my 17 years with the organization, trading 5 prospects for Mackenzie Gore. And then obviously, the trade that we made from Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien was a unique one in its own way. So, and then the other additions that we made to the club, we feel pretty good about the spot we're in. We know we're in a competitive division. We know we've got some things we need to take care of, but you add the new personnel alongside Skip Schumacher and the rest of the staff that we've added there, and feel really excited about this group and the direction that we're heading here.
Ross, when I talked to Chris Young last week after the Mackenzie Gore press conference about spring training, and I asked him what was the one thing he wanted to see in spring this year, and the first word, he didn't hesitate. He almost cut me off. It was hunger. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that means to you? Because I'm sure you guys are kind of in lockstep in terms of philosophy, but what does hunger mean where this team is concerned?
Yeah, I think in general, you're looking for a group that obviously they were humble to a certain extent last year with the expectations that we had going 81-81 and missing the postseason 2 years in a row coming off a World Series. So a lot of the group is back. There's obviously some different faces, but you get time in the offseason to reflect on that. You get to go, get after your work and get, preparation for the upcoming season. So I think pretty early on, we've already seen it, talking to our coaching staff this offseason, the conversations that they've had with our players, interactions that both Chris, myself, and others have had with our guys downstairs that have come in and out throughout the course of the offseason, what you really want to see is just, an underdog spirit and underdog mentality of, hey, we're not technically the favorites on paper right now, and that's okay. We're here to prove it. And, right now, our jobs this offseason, our whole exec team, our leadership group, we're trying to put together the best roster we can on paper. But at the end of the day, it's up to these guys to go out and do it. And I think you're going to see pretty early on in terms of the standard that Skip expects on the daily from our players and the way they go about their business, how hungry they are. And I know interactions with a couple of our guys and just the things that I've heard, this is a very hungry group right now. We're excited to see that come together here in spring and ultimately lead into this season that we have upcoming.
For me, nobody's as much a veteran of covering spring trainings as John, although he won't be in Surprise this year. But it always used to be, you go to camp and you would write about these 5 issues that the club had to solve during spring training, or 6 issues, whatever. I don't know that it's so much issues that you guys want to solve in spring training. What do you want to get done in spring training? Because most of what you guys do with the roster is by and large kind of decided, or at least contemplated. What do you want to accomplish in spring training this year?
Well, to state the obvious, we want to have a productive spring training and everybody to depart healthy. So that's kind of mission statement number 1. That being said, the way that our team's constructed, I think that there's quite a few spots that are spoken for in the offensive group, and then also the starting rotation and the bullpen. But one of the things that Mike Parnell and his group on the pro personnel side have done a really good job on is creating competition for those final spots. And we're going to continue to add some non-roster invitees, some guys with major league experience, creating competition in different areas of the roster. But, we want to come out with clarity at the end of this to, what is the best team that we can put together for the 2026 Rangers, knowing that whatever we ultimately start with is most likely not going to be the team from start to finish, and creating layers of depth and, other, competitive battles throughout the course of camp to give us confidence, and the staff confidence that should an injury pop up or should a performance regression happen, we've got other guys that are in this organization that can step in and continue to contribute towards a championship caliber club and a playoff caliber club. So,
Ross, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on that. You also bring to camp guys like Walcott, younger players. Spring training is, the end of the games, especially early on, the last 4 or 5 innings. You're looking at hopefully a lot of young guys, right? And, the best
right.
years, I think Evan can attest to this, is when your young guys can beat the other team's young guys at the end of the last 4 or 5 innings of games. You might have something there. And I'm sure that's also part of the equation as you elaborate on what you're talking about, creating that depth for later in the season and beyond.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we're fond of our players that we have, and it's fun to watch the end of the games, particularly early in camp, as you mentioned, John, when these guys come in, and you'll see the majority of our player development staff sitting in the stands or, somewhere sprinkled in there watching these players as well. And you want them to have a productive and, exciting opportunity in front of their future teammates, in front of the future staff that ultimately they aspire to play for. And we take a lot of pride in those games. And it's nice to pull back the curtain a little bit and see a glimpse into the future, whether that's in 2026 or 27 and beyond is kind of a to be determined depending on the players that are out there. But it's always an exciting time and an opportunity at the end of those games to see kind of the next wave or the potential players that may filter into this club here in Arlington in the near future.
So putting your player development,
right along those,
I was just going to say, putting your player development hat on. You talked about the 5 prospects that went to Washington for Gore. Back at the trade deadline last year, you guys traded a lot of young pitchers in acquiring Colum and Maton and the guys you got at the deadline. As a former player development director who oversaw that, how do you kind of balance that and the conversations that go on in weighing that? And I'm sure you have a lot to say in that regard when those kind of questions come up.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of the challenging parts of this job. going back to that, overseeing that department, what happens is you spend so much time invested with your people and the players that you create a kind of a connection with them and an emotional attachment to a certain extent. And, that's not even to say the relationships that Josh Bonifay, our farm director, Kenny Holmberg, our field coordinator, and the rest of our staff create with these players. But, everybody understands that we don't shy away from it. It started in 2023 when the team got off to a great start. We're in a win now cycle. We're in a win cycle. And you ultimately, from Kip and his group, when they bring these players into the organization, you ultimately aspire for them to be contributors to your playoff caliber clubs and your championship runs. But, that's not necessarily the nature of the beast at all times. And what I talk about our group is where we're at in our cycle and what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. We want to position our major league team for the best opportunity to win. And sometimes it costs us talented players in the system that we're invested in, but, we're putting them in a spot to go elsewhere and have very successful careers. And, one of our central missions in player development has always been, we're here to serve, and we're here to help these players grow to be closer to the best versions of themselves. And if that happens with us, it's fantastic. A lot of times it doesn't, but all we want to do is make sure that everybody that comes into this organization leaves in a better place. So if they get the opportunity elsewhere, there's a lot of people here with the Rangers that are rooting them on, as long as we're not playing them, and encouraging their best outcomes. And we're looking forward to following their careers. But the cycle that we're in, everybody understands it's just the nature of the beast, and it takes talent to get talent, and that's where we're at.
Along those lines, fans will go out to spring training and they will patrol the backfields a little bit. And there's a lot of numbers running around out there that guys aren't real sure who they're seeing. People are very much aware of Sebastian Walcott at this point in time. And with the trades over the last couple of years, there's been a level of prospects peeled off. So it's time to put you, Ross, on the spot. I was going to say that Caden Scarborough is a guy that I would like to see some during spring training, but he's now your number 2 prospect. And so I think that people are becoming very much accustomed to that name. Is there somebody that either patrolling the backfields or who will get some call-overs that is a very intriguing name for people to keep their eyes on?
I mean, you hit it, Evan. We have traded a lot of players, but one of the great things is we feel we've replenished over the years and we'll continue to do so. So I think there's still plenty of exciting names and guys that you may see, to John's point earlier, at the end of major league games, whether they're in camp or invited over. Some of the upper level arms, Jose Corniel's obviously in camp, some of these other 40-man guys, but could be contributors. Dalton Pence is somebody that I think is on the radar. Josh Trentadue is somebody you might see late in games, a few other arms. But, on the backfield, you go a little bit lower in the system. I think, we've got a pretty talented bunch that's most likely going to start at the A-ball level this year, between both levels. But Sungjoon Kim, who's a Korean shortstop, right-handed pitcher, two-way guy that we signed. He's stateside right now. We'll see where he starts the year, but really excited about him. Yolfran Castillo is a very talented shortstop that is going to go back to Hickory most likely to start the year. So really any field that I could go on and on about our players. I think we still have quite a bit of talent here, but anywhere you go in the backfield, you should pop up to a field and see at least one, if not several, future major league players. So excited about that.
So obviously, Ross, one of the big stories going into the season is seeing development from Evan Carter, Josh Smith, Josh Young. You've been around them this winter. What is your kind of your feel going into spring training on how those guys are gonna do and rebound here?
Yeah, most of those guys have actually been around the majority of the offseason, so it's been good to be around them. And I think, you talked a little bit earlier about what hunger means. I think all three of those guys are very hungry in different ways and for different reasons. But, Evan, I think, is, in a great spot right now. I had to sort through a few things on his end and, has some challenges ahead of him in terms of continue to solve for left-handed pitching. And we're confident that he's going to find a solution to that. But, he just wants to be on the field and contribute any way possible. And when he's on the field, he's a dynamic add to our group. He has on-base skills. his, opportunistic slug, the defense that he plays in the outfield, center field, any corner that we put him in. So, and a difference maker on the bases as well. And I think he's motivated to add more stolen bases and maybe a little bit more base running value to his game. Smitty is somebody that, is first year arbitration eligible and, very talented player in his own right. It's almost like back-to-back years he's been on the cusp of being an all-star based off the first half he's had. And, it hasn't quite sustained it in the second half. And I think conversations with our staff and, some introspection on his part, he's, put on a little bit more muscle. He looks great seeing him downstairs all the time. He's here almost every single day. He's in a good spot. He's motivated to show that the first half can be carried out through the course of an entire season. And, he's a very talented player. And then Josh is, been a little bit snake bitten over the years by injuries, all-star season in 2023 and trying to get back to that form. And, talked a little bit about different offensive approaches that he's had. The defense is going to be there. But just keeping him on the field and allowing him to get to the best version of himself, which we think he's fully capable of doing. He's in a great headspace right now, and we're excited to see those guys come into camp. I think they're, in some ways, outside of the stars, they're the linchpins of this operation in terms of this middle tier of player that we have to continue to elevate their game. And when they're, contributing on the everyday level, we're a really good team and a really deep team, and we're excited to see those guys contribute.
Hey, Ross, I wanted to ask you two pitching related questions before we let you go, because it's been a question that has been asked. They've both been asked of me a lot by fans this offseason. You traded for Mackenzie Gore and gave yourself a really top tier kind of number 3 arm to go into the rotation. I think some fans have overlooked the fact that you traded for Brandon Nimmo early in the season, and that should be an upgrade, whether you want to count it against right field or whether you want to count it against second base, where he was traded for Marcus Semien. But there wasn't much expenditure on position players. You guys have operated from the idea we're going to strengthen a strength. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit and why that was the method you ended up going?
When you say strength and strength, pitching specifically, is that what you're asking about? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, we led the league in pitching last year, and had a tremendous year all around. And ideally, I think it's unrealistic to expect us to repeat that. I think it's very possible, but we believe we have a top 5 pitching group in the game, and we've done a good job the last few years of reorienting the bullpen and figuring out solutions there. And, we just saw an opportunity, with Mackenzie Gore as somebody who, a 27-year-old all-star left-handed starter, the bat necessarily wasn't there in terms of where we felt we could upgrade. But this was an opportunity to upgrade, and somebody that we think has been great in his own right, and probably doesn't get the notoriety and attention that he deserves because he was not on playoff caliber clubs. But coming into this environment, and pairing him with Jacob and Evo and Jack and others, we think that, it's one of the best rotations in baseball when they're all healthy, and we'll take them against anybody. So we did strengthen that strength, and it allowed us maybe to do some different things with how we deploy our bullpen as well. But I think to the other point, or somewhat related here, offensively, we have a lot of faith and belief and conviction in this group bouncing back. And, given where we see these guys going and what we expect them to do in 2026, the challenge for us is we could add a player, but are they truly an upgrade in terms of what we have if we get the best version of these players that we have? And so you analyze it that way. And what we ultimately came to is, we made that baseball decision for Brandon, the trade that we made for Brandon Nimmo, who upgraded outfield, and we felt like we had good internal competition at second base. Obviously not as established as somebody like Marcus, but enough competition where we felt like we could, add a skill set to the offense that upgraded us. But other than that, it was those opportunities simply weren't there. And, our job, we talk about this all the time, CY and I, our job is to turn every single page possible. We were going to explore every avenue, and ultimately we're a byproduct. What we do is a byproduct of what the market dictates. And the market dictated that there was an impact left-handed starter that we could acquire in Mackenzie. So we went out and we got him. And, one of the things that I, pride ourselves in as a group is as the season goes, even spring training, that we're going to continue to look for upgrades. It might be marginal upgrades. It might be things that strengthen, maybe some deficiencies on the club if we identify that that's an issue, but we're never going to stop. It's a 365-day-a-year job. We're always going to find ways in which we can upgrade the club and fortify the group. And that's one of the fun things about, the nature of the beast is, you're always analyzing, you're always looking, and you're always trying to make the team a little bit better, because that's what our fans deserve. That's what our players deserve. And we're trying to do the very best we can.
So the last one for me is, you just talked a little bit about the bullpen and figuring out the bullpen. You guys have done a remarkable job over the last 3 years in particular of, especially late, finding guys who help you figure out the bullpen kind of on the fly, right? Will Smith was a late sign in 23. Last year, obviously, with Sean Armstrong and Hobie Milner, you remade the bullpen. You've had a good track record, and I can't overlook what Kirby Yates did for you in 24. So you've had a good track record there, but you don't have that established closer in the bullpen, or somebody who goes in determined to be the closer. Do you guys feel like closers are overvalued more by fans than in baseball right now? That it's easier to figure that out than to go out and spend $15 million like it would have taken to go sign Ryan Helsley or Devin Williams or somebody like that?
Not necessarily, Evan. I mean, I think having end of game experience is valuable. We have decided that the market, just wasn't there for us in terms of the ability to add a player, that caliber, players with that experience, and we wanted to address other needs of the club. That being said, I would not say that finding a closer is easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's very challenging. But having conversations, in the past with, staff members and ultimately now with Skip, we do feel like there are some opportunities to deploy our players in terms of pockets or different strategies and ways where we can get outs without having somebody with the track record or the established pedigree of saving games. Now, if that player presents itself, which in 2023 it did in the form of Aroldis Chapman, I can assure you we will pursue that, and we will have those discussions and that dialogue, whoever that is in 2026. But we feel really good about the group that we have. We feel good about the strategy in which we utilize them and set them up for success. But kind of going back to what I said earlier, we're never going to stop in terms of ways of finding ways in which we can upgrade this club further. And if those opportunities present themselves, we will certainly be in on them.
Well, and I hate to bring this up, but health, you mentioned it early on. Right now, not bad, but Cody Bradford is a guy that's still recovering from his arm surgery last season. Where do you see him standing and when he might be able to contribute?
Yeah, Cody's doing great. He threw his first bullpen a few weeks back. Went well. He's in a great spot right now. We're probably targeting the end of May at this point in terms of him returning to the rotation, assuming that things continue to progress as expected. He'll be active and involved in spring training, so he'll be throwing sides. He'll be around, but we're gonna build him up, slowly and responsibly. And I think right now we're looking forward to a May edition, and what role that is will somewhat be dictated at the time by how the rest of the group is doing, what we think is in the best interest of the club. But it's hard to add players, starting caliber pitchers like that in May or June, ultimately when he comes back in season. So we're excited to add him and add an additional layer of depth.
We appreciate it, Ross. Good luck in spring training. I mean, we all know it's a long haul, and you keep your fingers crossed every day. You keep them all on the field and everything, but we appreciate your time today. Ross had a lot of great insight there, Evan, and like I said, spring training is what it is. It's a long spring, but I really like talking to Ross. I think he's a good compliment to Chris Young, and because he brings so much, to me, institutional knowledge into this franchise, and he checks a lot of boxes.
Well, and listen, we've not done a great job of telling Ross's story here at the paper, and hopefully we'll rectify that this year. But look, as you mentioned, here's a guy who comes in as an intern in 2010 and over 17 years has worked his way up from amateur scouting, pro scouting, international, overseeing player development. He really has um, that full toolbox of how you build an organization at his disposal. So it's been a great success story for him, and it is a case of, you know, the Rangers promoting their own, which is always good for organizational morale. And yeah, it's great to see Ross have a bigger imprint on the organization over the last couple of years, publicly as well.
And Ross did go to Round Rock on the Rangers caravan this year, and I think Ross would have liked the old-time caravans we used to go on as we bring it up in this week's Archives in Arlington. And we're going to talk a little bit about Rangers caravans from the past. And as Evan mentioned earlier, this year the weather kind of did a number on FanFest and the whole Rangers caravan program. But if you look at the history of caravans, Evan, and a lot of it has to do with newspapers. I mean, it really does, because we would go, the object back in the 1980s and 1990s was you wanted to hit the outer markets where fans and media particularly didn't really get to have contact with your team during a season. So a lot of it was that driven. And as you know, having been a long-time scribe and newspaper man back when you wore those little hats that said press on it, you remember those days.
Yeah. Fondly.
You know, we would go to small markets and you would get Abilene Reporter and San Angelo paper and Tyler and Sherman and Waco, and all these small papers would send usually their sports editor, right, who was usually a fairly well-known person in those parts, and a photographer, and you'd get some radio and TV, and that was a lot of the reason we did these caravans. And we would go out for a whole week in the 80s and 90s, and our big-name players would go. You know, in the 80s, it was guys like Pete O'Brien and Jim Sundberg and, you know, guys like that were your big-name guys, and your manager would go and your general manager would go a lot of the time. Well, a lot of that has changed with the way the game is, and guys now wanting to not miss training and that kind of thing. And when we would be staying at Holiday Inns, but it was a great time, you know, for me, because I got to, you know these guys, go out with them and everything. And you did miss some of that. And did you ever go on one of those caravans at all? When we did that?
I never went on a caravan trip with the club, and I had wanted to, but you know, even at that point in time, the scope was kind of going just down a little bit. But you know, I think that the caravan idea throughout baseball, and these winter appearances was always to sell tickets. And yes, you met with the media people, and
the media helped you sell tickets in those markets.
100%.
That was part of it.
But my fondest caravan memory is probably one of my fondest memories as a kid of being a Braves fan is, you know, the Braves had a caravan stop that wasn't far from my home when I was, I guess, 8 years old. And they did a thing where Milo Hamilton asked questions of people, or asked questions. There was a trivia thing, and if you answered the question right, you might get something. Well, I got a question right as an 8-year-old, and I won, you know, a Braves hat. And I think it was the second year that they had gone to the small script A. I had that hat for 4 years. Was it
Del Crandall? Oh, that's a little before your time.
That was before my time. But it was just so, it made an impression on me, right? It left a lasting impression. I think for fans in outer markets, you know, those kinds of things stick. I will say a couple things about, like, the changes to the caravan before we get into some of your stories. You know, I talked to the Rangers officials about this year, and what we have seen, another thing that's changed, is you don't get the same interaction anymore, because people show up, the collectible buyers show up with lots of cards and lots of stuff, and they tend to camp out or have people camp out for them. And so it limits the amount of interaction you can have between players and just fans in those markets. And that's part of why the Rangers had gone to like, we weren't going to do autographs this year kind of policy, they were going to make those available at FanFest, but they weren't going to do them at the caravan stops. You were going to be able to take your picture with a player and have that, but you weren't going to be able to just go get autographs. And the Rangers had hoped that that would eliminate some of the collectible market. But yeah, listen, I mean, we're both getting old and we're reminiscing about the past, and that's what Ranger Archives in Arlington is all about. But yeah, it was another fun era of the game that I think we both had fond memories of in different ways.
But not so fast. It wasn't always fun. I will say that back in the 80s and the 90s. We had our bumps in the road, so to speak.
Like what, John?
Well, when I got here in the mid-'80s, the Rangers, as longtime fans know, we weren't very good. And we would go on the road, and we'd go to a mall, and we would show up. We'd have a table in the mall, and people thought we were the Texas Rangers law enforcement a lot of the time. And I would have to spend time running around to the mall, trying to get people to come up to I was more a carnival barker. We didn't have long lines, again, with fairly big-name players.
Did you wear a little striped shirt with a straw boater?
I had a big megaphone and trying to get people to come over to our tables. We also, one year, and I won't mention the particular beer sponsor, we had a beer sponsor for the caravan. And one of the things they wanted us to do was go to bars. Not necessarily at night. We would be going to bars at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you can imagine the clientele we were trying to, hey, you want a Ranger bumper sticker or something like that. So that year was very interesting, as the players can recollect.
Did you get in any barroom brawls?
We luckily we did not, and I didn't either. But again, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we did that one whole winter. Weather obviously was a factor at times. I remember one trip, and we used to go to the hinterlands. Rangers had our Double-A team was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so one year we're driving from Tulsa, I believe, to Sherman, down through and we run into a snowstorm, and I was driving the van, and the windshield wipers basically stopped working, right? So we pull into this little town, and you can look it up. It's called Calvin, Oklahoma, okay? And I needed new windshield wipers. The problem was the only garage in the town, we pulled up to it, and there was a sign up on the door, closed due to a funeral. The whole town was at a funeral, apparently, so we had to wait until the guy who ran the garage came back. Luckily, we didn't miss our appearance in Sherman that year. We had a 2-day weather event one year in West Texas, Amarillo at Lubbock, where the players really got antsy that time. I mean, because we were snowed in like a Holiday Inn in Lubbock. And so we had our moments on the trips. We also went to a town one time, you've probably never heard of, Brant, Texas. Population 918. 1.4 square miles was the town. We were trying to make inroads in West Texas, right? And Brant, this club in Brant reached out to us, and we bid, and we did an event at their school. The high school and the elementary school were in one building, and we basically had the whole town out. It was great. But I'll never forget Brant, Texas. And if you look it up, I believe it's in Coke County, out in West Texas. That was a one to remember. But there's one that tops everything, and this was in the late 80s. And again, we took all kinds of modes of transportation. I drove sometimes, which was a huge liability for the team, obviously, if anybody's ever seen me drive. We used passenger buses. We even flew at times. We'd get the owner's private aircraft. But one year we had a sponsorship with an RV dealer. So we had this nice Winnebago, which the players loved. I mean, traveling around Winnebago wasn't the worst thing. So we're on a 3-day trip, I think, to East Texas. And I was not on this trip. And we were staying overnight at the Holiday Inn in Texarkana. And Marty Scott, rest in peace, was our farm director. And he was very gregarious, and he was on this trip as the baseball ops executive. He calls me at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and he says, "We just had a little fire in the Winnebago. It basically burned to the ground." So, okay.
It's not
so
a
we had
little
to
fire, John.
No, it's not. And the players on the trip, Peter Gavilia was among the players on this trip. I never found out the genesis for how this fire happened. So I don't know if there was the players went out there late at night. Marty claims he knows nothing about how it burned down or how it burned to the ground. But it did. And so we sent a bus out. That was the last time we used a Winnebago, I think, especially on a caravan trip. So that was probably the one story that I remember most about caravans. So,
as always, it involves a fire or a firing or some kind of disaster. But, tales from the Rangers' past never fails to disappoint.
No, and caravans were fun. And like Evan said, it's a different world these days. And between autograph collectors and the dearth of media in these small towns, which is still a shame to me. But again, I'm an old guy. And the way you tell your messages, it's changed the whole thing. So as we go on here, we'll have some spring training stories, I'm sure, too, and Evan is involved in a few of those. It'll be interesting to go. But that will do it for the archives in Arlington this week, the story of the exploding Winnebago. So we thank you for joining us on this week's edition of SportsDay Rangers.
Don't forget, I'm off to Surprise, and I'll be there all week. Well, almost all of the 7 weeks. But we'll pick up the pace with our episodes. We'll be doing weekly episodes, hopefully involving some current players, hopefully involving some guys from the past, maybe even tell a few interesting stories that don't involve Winnebagos along the way.
And there are some former Rangers that are really involved in coaching staffs for the WBC too, which is going to be certainly a storyline during spring training.
So hopefully we'll get some of those people on as well.
So as always, you can follow us on social media. I'm at Ranger Blake, and he's at Evan_P_Grant. And we'll talk to you all soon. You all have a great day, and Evan, have a great spring.